The thin, biting wind of late autumn cared nothing for the threadbare cardigan pulled tight around Serafina's frail shoulders. It was a predator sinking its teeth into her bones, making them ache with a cold that felt ancient and deep. But the shivering that racked her body wasn't just from the wind. It was a tremor born of perpetual fear, a constant hum of anxiety that lived under her skin. She sat on the hard, unforgiving bench outside the pharmacy, her gaze fixed on the cracked pavement, trying to make herself as small as possible. Beside her, a looming shadow of a man, Dominic, checked his gold watch with an impatient sigh. His presence was a physical weight, pressing the air from her lungs. He was her son-in-law, her caretaker, her jailer. The world saw a devoted man looking after his elderly mother-in-law. She knew the monster that lurked behind the charming facade. He had taken everything, her home, her money, her freedom. Now, he was slowly taking her will to live. A low rumble cut through the city's drone, growing into a guttural roar that vibrated up through the soles of her worn shoes. A motorcycle, a gleaming beast of chrome and black steel, pulled up to the curb. The rider dismounted, a young man who couldn't have been much older than her own grandson would have been. He wore jeans, heavy boots, and a leather vest over a hoodie. The vest was new, the patches stark and clean, identifying him as a prospect for the local Hells Angels chapter. He was just running into the coffee shop next door, an errand for his brothers, but his eyes snagged on the old woman. He saw the tremble, the downcast eyes, the way she flinched when the man beside her shifted. He'd seen that look before, in his own home, on his own mother's face years ago. It was the look of a trapped animal. The young prospect, Rook Evans, hesitated. Club rules were clear. No trouble, no drawing attention, especially when you were just a prospect. But the code of his heart, the one his grandfather had instilled in him long before he'd ever touched a Harley, screamed louder. He changed course, walking not to the coffee shop, but directly toward the bench. Dominic's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing into venomous slits. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice a low threat wrapped in false politeness. Ricky ignored him, his gaze soft as he knelt before Serafina. "Ma'am," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle, "you look frozen. Please, take my jacket." He began to shrug off his leather vest. It was his prized possession, the symbol of everything he was working for, the first step into a brotherhood he craved. Giving it to a stranger was unthinkable. Dominic stood up, his 6'3" frame casting a chilling shadow over them. "She's fine. We're leaving." "Get away from her," Serafina flinched, her eyes darting from Dominic's furious face to the kind, worried eyes of the young man. In that flicker of a moment, Ricky saw it all, the terror, the desperation, and a tiny, buried spark of defiance. He also saw the ugly, purple-yellow bruise encircling her delicate wrist, poorly hidden by the cuff of her cardigan. That was it. The line was crossed. "I insist," Ricky said, his voice hardening. He slipped the heavy leather vest off and draped it carefully over Serafina's trembling shoulders. The warmth was immediate, a shield against the wind and, for a fleeting second, against the fear. As he did so, his fingers brushed hers, and with a movement so subtle it was almost invisible, he pressed a small, cold object in her palm, a tiny, disposable burner phone. He had started carrying one after a close call with the law a month prior, a lesson in preparedness from the club's sergeant-at-arms. Now it felt like fate. "Keep warm, ma'am," he said, his eyes locking with hers, trying to convey a universe of meaning in a single look. "Help is always there for those who ask for it." Dominic grabbed Serafina's arm, his fingers digging into her bruised flesh. "I said, we're leaving," he snarled, yanking her to her feet. He glared at Ricky. "You'll regret this, you pathetic filth." Ricky stood his ground, watching them go. He watched as Dominic shoved Serafina into a sleek, black sedan, the door slamming shut with a sound of finality. He watched the car speed away, leaving him standing on the cold sidewalk without his vest, a cold fury building in his chest. He hadn't just given away a piece of leather. He had thrown down a gauntlet, and he knew, with chilling certainty, that his club would be the ones to pick it up. Ricky walked back into the clubhouse. The familiar scent of stale beer, old leather, and motor oil doing little to calm the storm inside him. The place was humming with the usual low-key energy. Brothers were cleaning bike parts at a long workbench. Others were playing a loud game of pool, and a few were gathered around the massive oak table in the center of the room, talking business. At the head of that table sat Jax Ryder, the chapter president. He was a mountain of a man, his arms a tapestry of ink that told the story of his life, his face carved from granite and experience. His eyes, sharp and intelligent, missed nothing. They immediately landed on Ricky, noting the absence of his prospect vest. Rook, Jax's voice was a low, gravelly rumble that cut through the noise of the room. You lose something? The room went quiet. All eyes turned to Ricky. Losing your cut, even a prospect cut, was a cardinal sin. It was a sign of disrespect, of carelessness. Ricky swallowed hard, his throat dry. He walked to the table and stood before his president, feeling like a schoolboy in the principal's office. I didn't lose it, Prez, he said, his voice steady despite the tremor he felt. I gave it away. A murmur rippled through the room. One of the older members, a grizzled man named Bear, slammed his fist on the table. You what? You gave away club property? To who? Ricky took a deep breath and recounted the entire scene. He described the old woman, the bone-deep cold that wasn't just from the weather, the fear in her eyes that was so profound it felt like a physical thing. He described the man, Dominic, the casual cruelty in his voice, the possessive, brutal grip on her arm. He described the bruise. It wasn't right, Jax, Ricky finished, his gaze locked on his president. I saw my mom in her eyes. I saw every woman who's ever been made to feel small and scared. I couldn't just walk away. The skepticism in the room was palpable. They were outlaws, not social workers. Their business was bikes, Brotherhood, and carving out their own slice of freedom, not getting tangled in domestic disputes. But Jax remained silent, his expression unreadable. He was listening, and in Ricky's words, he was hearing echoes from his own past, ghosts he had tried to bury for over a decade. He wasn't seeing a stranger on a bench. He was seeing his younger sister, Amelia. An extended, painful memory flooded his mind, so vivid it was as if it were happening all over again. He was in his 20s, a newly patched member, full of piss and vinegar. Amelia was his bright, bubbly sister, the light of their family. She had started dating a man, a smooth-talking real estate developer who seemed perfect on the surface. Jax had disliked him on sight, a primal instinct he couldn't explain. But Amelia was in love, and he had backed off, not wanting to be the overbearing biker brother. He remembered the little things, the signs he'd dismissed. The way she started wearing long sleeves in the summer. The way she'd flinch if he moved too quickly. The excuses she'd make for why she couldn't come to family dinners. He's just stressed from work, she'd say, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. The guilt was a physical weight in Jax's chest. He remembered the last time he saw her alive. She had called him, her voice a frantic whisper. Jax, can you come? I think I made a mistake. He was on his way out for a club run, a long-distance trip they'd planned for weeks. Can it wait, Amy? I'm about to hit the road. The silence on the other end of the line had stretched for an eternity. Then a quiet yeah. Okay, it can wait. Have fun. Be safe. He never heard her voice again. They found her 2 days later. The official report said she fell down the stairs. Jax knew better. He had failed to see, failed to act, failed to listen to the whisper for help. He had chosen the club over his blood, and he had lived with that corrosive guilt every single day since. He looked at Ricky, this young prospect with more heart than sense, who had seen in a stranger what Jax had failed to see in his own sister. The kid had risked the wrath of the club to follow a gut feeling, to offer a piece of himself as a shield. Jax's hand clenched into a fist on the table. What was the man's name? He asked, his voice dangerously low. Ricky looked surprised. He called himself Dominic. The woman. I didn't get her name. Jax nodded slowly. Bear, you and Scab get on your laptops. Find me everything you can on a guy named Dominic who drives a high-end black sedan and keeps an elderly woman in his company. Check property records, business licenses, social media. Dig deep. He then turned his gaze to the rest of the room. The kid did the right thing. He upheld the code that matters more than a piece of leather. We don't let people suffer on our watch. Not anymore. He stood up, his presence filling the room. Rook, you're with me. We're going to find out where she lives. And then his eyes glinted with a cold, hard fire. We're going to have a conversation with this Dominic. The skepticism in the room evaporated, replaced by a grim, unified resolve. This was no longer a domestic dispute. It was club business now. The president had spoken, and in his voice, the older members heard the echoes of Amelia, the tragedy that had forged their leader into the man he was today. A protector, a vigilante, an enforcer of a justice the law too often ignored. The clubhouse transformed from a rowdy bar into a tactical command center. The pool table was covered with sprawling city maps, laptops humming as Bear and Scab. The club's tech experts dove into the digital world. Jax stood over them, a storm cloud of focused intensity. He gave them the sparse details. A pharmacy on the east side, a black luxury sedan, a man named Dominic. It wasn't much, but for men accustomed to hunting in the shadows, it was a start. Got a partial play from a traffic cam near the pharmacy, Scab grunted after an hour of furious typing. Ran it through our unofficial DMV contact. The car is registered to Valerius Holdings, a private equity firm. Dominic Valerius, Bear added, his fingers flying across his keyboard. See, lives in a gated community up in the hills. Big money. Ex-wife filed a restraining order 5 years ago. Alleged physical and psychological abuse. Dropped the charges a month later after a hefty settlement. The guy knows how to make problems disappear with money. Jax's jaw tightened. This was exactly the kind of monster he despised. A coward who hid his sadism behind a wall of wealth and lawyers. Give me the address. Rook, you're with me. We're taking a ride. They didn't go in force. That would come later, if needed. For now, it was about stealth. Jax and Ricky swapped their roaring Harleys for a beat-up, nondescript panel van. One the club kept for special projects. They parked it on a wooded access road overlooking the opulent, sterile streets of the gated community. From their vantage point, they had a clear view of a sprawling modern mansion that looked more like a glass and steel fortress than a home. It was cold, impersonal, and surrounded by a high wall topped with security cameras. For 2 days, they watched. They took shifts, their world shrinking to the view through a pair of high-power binoculars. They subsisted on lukewarm coffee from a thermos and beef jerky, the silence in the van thick with tension. Ricky learned more about his president in those 2 days of silence than he had in 6 months of prospecting. He saw the unblinking focus, the patience of a predator, the deep, simmering rage that was kept on a tight leash. On the first afternoon, they saw her. Serafina. She was in the backyard, a space that looked like a pristine hotel garden, tending to a small patch of rose bushes. Even from a distance, her movements were stiff, her shoulders hunched. Dominic came out onto the patio, yelling something they couldn't hear. He gestured angrily at the roses. Serafina flinched back, and he strode over, grabbing the pruning shears from her hand and throwing them against the wall. He grabbed her arm, his body language pure menace, and dragged her back inside the house. That's him, Ricky whispered, his knuckles white as he gripped the dashboard. Jax didn't say a word. He just lifted a long-lens camera and started taking pictures, documenting everything. The iron grip on her arm, the fear on her face, the way the heavy glass door slid shut, trapping her back in the gilded cage. They gathered more intel. They learned Dominic's routine. He left every morning at 8 a.m. sharp and returned at 6 p.m. A cleaning crew came on Wednesdays, a grocery delivery service on Fridays. He had a team of private security guards, 2 at the gate and at least 2 more who roamed the property. This was a professional operation of isolation. Inside that sterile mansion, Serafina felt the weight of every passing second. The leather vest Ricky had given her was her secret talisman. Dominic had seen it and sneered. Picking up trash now, are we? He'd thrown it into a closet in her room, but he hadn't destroyed it. It was a mistake. In the dead of night, when the house was silent and the ghosts of her past life walked the halls, she would take it out. The leather was heavy, solid. It smelled of gasoline and freedom. And in the inner pocket, her trembling fingers would find the small, hard shape of the burner phone. Hope was a dangerous, foreign feeling. For years, her only goal had been survival, to endure Dominic's moods, to not give him a reason to unleash his temper. He had taken control after her husband, Robert, had passed away. At first, he was the grieving, supportive son-in-law. He helped with the funeral, with the estate. Then he moved in. To make sure you're not alone, slowly, insidiously, he had severed her from the world. He screened her calls, intercepted her mail, fired her longtime staff, and replaced them with people loyal to him. He convinced her she was becoming forgetful, incompetent, and had her sign over power of attorney. The prison bars had been forged from kindness and concern, and by the time she saw them for what they were, it was too late. The phone felt like a bomb in her hands. If he found it, he would kill her. She had no doubt about that. But the image of the young biker's kind eyes, the memory of that brief, defiant moment on the bench had planted a seed. For the first time in years, she wasn't just thinking about surviving. She was thinking about living. The decision was made for her on the third night of the stakeout. The catalyst was something small, almost insignificant. A glass of spilled water. Serafina was carrying a tray to Dominic as he worked in his home office, a vast, sterile room lined with shelves of law books he'd never read. Her hand, weakened by age and anxiety, trembled. The glass slipped, shattering on the polished concrete floor. The water spread, soaking the corner of an expensive-looking rug. Dominic didn't shout. He didn't raise his voice. The silence that followed was far more terrifying. He slowly stood up, his face a mask of cold, reptilian fury. He walked over to her, his movements deliberate, predatory. "Clumsy old woman," he hissed, his voice a venomous whisper. "You are more trouble than you are worth. Do you know how much this rug costs? It costs more than your miserable life is worth." He grabbed her by the hair, yanking her head back. Pain exploded in her scalp. "My associates are coming tomorrow," he continued, his face inches from hers. "We're finalizing the sale of this house and all its assets. Your assets. And you, my dear mother-in-law, are a loose end, a liability. I think it's time for you to have a little accident, a fall, just like Amelia." He smiled, a chilling, joyless expression. He was talking about Jax's sister. Dominic, it turned out, had known Amelia's abuser. They moved in the same circles of wealthy predators. He had learned from the man's success in getting away with murder. That was it. The final thread of her endurance snapped. He wasn't just going to keep her prisoner. He was going to erase her. All the fear, all the pain, all the degradation coalesced into a single, white-hot point of pure, unadulterated will. She had to live. Later that night, locked in her room, the door bolted from the outside, she pulled the Hell's Angel's vest from its hiding place. Her hand was shaking so violently, she could barely work the small phone. She thought back to her husband, Robert, a decorated soldier who had taught her that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but acting in spite of it. She remembered the young biker's eyes, the promise of help. With a final, ragged breath, she powered on the phone. The small screen glowed, a beacon in the oppressive darkness. Her fingers, clumsy with terror and adrenaline, typed out a short, desperate message. She didn't know who it would go to. She didn't know if it would even be seen. But it was the only move she had left to play. She typed, "The Angel's jacket. He knows Amelia. Tomorrow is too late. Help." She pressed send. The message flew out into the night. A digital prayer, a spark of hope launched from the depths of hell. In the stakeout van, the burner phone, connected to a separate charger, buzzed. Jax snatched it up. He read the message once, twice. The name, Amelia, hit him like a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs. This wasn't just some random act of cruelty. This monster, this Dominic Valerius, was connected to his sister's death. The case had gone cold years ago, the abuser walking free. Now, a thread had appeared. A ghost from his past had risen, and it was pointing the way to a fresh hell. Rage, cold and absolute, flooded him. This was no longer just a rescue. It was a reckoning. "It's time," he said to Ricky, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He's making his move. So we're making ours. He started the van, the engine rumbling to life. But he wasn't driving back to the clubhouse. He was driving to war. Jax didn't waste a second. As the van rumbled down the hill from the affluent prison, he was already on his primary phone. His first call wasn't to his own chapter. It was to a man named Silas, the president of the Hell's Angels Nomad chapter, a man who answered only to the highest authority and whose loyalty to Jax was forged in a long-forgotten desert conflict decades ago. Silas, it's Jax. I'm calling the banner. There was a pause on the other end, the gravity of the words hanging in the air. Calling the banner was a rare and sacred act, a summons for an overwhelming show of force reserved for only the most dire circumstances, an attack on a president, the murder of a member, or a threat so vile it offended the very soul of their code. Who and where? Silas asked. No further questions needed. Dominic Valerius, North Hills Estate. He's a ghost from the Amelia situation, and he has an innocent woman. He plans to kill her by morning, Jax said, his voice tight with controlled fury. It's personal. How many do you need? Silas's voice was grim. All of them, Jax replied. I want to blot out the sun with chrome and leather. I want the ground to shake. I want him to hear the thunder of God rolling down his manicured street. Consider it done. We ride at dawn. His next calls were to the presidents of the 5 surrounding charters, San Bernardino, Oakland, Daly City, and beyond. He kept the message short, brutal, and to the point. He explained the situation, the connection to his sister, the woman trapped and facing death. To each president, he didn't give an order. He made a request, brother to brother. The response was unanimous and immediate. When they pulled back into their own clubhouse, the atmosphere was electric. Jax strode into the center of the room, the burner phone clutched in his hand. He didn't need to shout. His presence commanded absolute attention. Church, he bellowed, the traditional call for an emergency chapter meeting. The pool game stopped. The wrenches were put down. Every single member gathered around the oak table, their faces a mixture of curiosity and grim anticipation. Jax laid it all out. He told them about the stakeout, the photos, the confirmation of the abuse. Then, his voice dropping, he told them about the message. He told them the name Amelia had been invoked by the target. He didn't need to explain the significance. Every man in that room knew the story of their president's sister. It was the club's foundational tragedy, the ghost that rode on Jax's shoulder. This man, Dominic Valerius, is part of the same scum that took my sister, Jax said, his voice raw with a pain he rarely showed. And right now, he has an old woman, Serafina, locked in his house. He plans to murder her and make it look like an accident, just like they did with Amy. He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of every one of his brothers. Our prospect, Rook, saw a woman in pain, and he didn't look away. He acted. He upheld our real code, not the one written in bylaws, but the one written on our hearts. We protect those who can't protect themselves. We're the monsters who hunt the real monsters. He slammed his fist on the table, the sound echoing like a gunshot. We have spent years building this brotherhood. For what? To sell t-shirts and look tough? Or for moments like this? To stand as a shield for the innocent? To deliver righteous fury to the doorsteps of evil men? A roar of approval erupted from the men. There was no hesitation, no debate. This was why they wore the patch. This was the soul of the Hell's Angels. Silas and the Nomads are inbound. Jax continued, his voice rising over the din. The other charters are mobilizing. By sunrise, we will have a force of over 600 brothers ready to ride. We are going to descend on that mansion, and we are going to pull that woman out of the fire. We will be disciplined. We will be surgical. The security are just hired guns. We neutralize them. We don't hospitalize them. Our target is one man, Dominic Valerius. We will extract him, and we will deliver him to a justice system he can't buy his way out of. But first, Jax's eyes burn with cold fire. We're going to make sure he understands what it feels like to be powerless, to be afraid, to have everything you hold dear stripped away from you by a force you cannot possibly comprehend. The planning began in earnest. The maps came out again, but this time they were tactical charts. Entry points, security patrol routes, communication channels. Roles were assigned. A breach team, A perimeter team, a non-lethal crowd control unit for the private security. Every man knew his job. The sound of tools clinking on chrome filled the air as bikes were given final checks. Engines were tested, their deep rumble a promise of the storm to come. Men donned their cuts, the leather creaking like armor. The mood was somber, focused, and utterly determined. This wasn't a party. It was a crusade. Rook, Evans, the prospect who started it all, was given a new vest handed to him by Jax himself. It wasn't a prospect cut. It was a full patch member's vest. "You earned this tonight, kid," Jax said gruffly, clapping him on the shoulder. "You've got the heart of a true angel. Now let's go show this bastard what that means." The staging area was a desolate stretch of industrial wasteland miles from the city, a place of cracked asphalt and forgotten warehouses. As the first hints of gray light painted the eastern sky, they began to arrive. At first, it was a trickle. A dozen bikes from the local chapter, their engines a low, menacing hum. Then, from the north, the rumble grew. The Oakland charter arrived, a wave of 50 Harleys moving as one. From the south, another thunderous roar announced the arrival of the San Bernardino boys, their bikes gleaming under the pale pre-dawn light. Soon, every artery leading to the wasteland was filled with the sight and sound of motorcycles. They came in disciplined packs, nomads, veterans, prospects, and patch members from half a dozen charters, all drawn by Jax's call. The air grew thick with the smell of exhaust and the vibrating energy of hundreds of powerful engines. It was an army clad in leather and denim, united by a single purpose. The final count was well over 600. A sea of chrome and steel stretched across the asphalt, a testament to the power and reach of their brotherhood. Jax stood on the back of a flatbed truck, looking out over the incredible display of loyalty and force. Beside him stood Silas, the nomad president, his face weathered and calm. "You called, brother," Silas said simply. "And we came." Jax gave a single, appreciative nod. He raised his hand, and a hush fell over the massive crowd. The idling of 600 V-twin engines dropped to a low, syncopated heartbeat. "Today, we ride for the forgotten," Jax's voice boomed, amplified by a small speaker. "We ride for a woman named Serafina, who's been stripped of her dignity and her freedom. We ride for my sister, Amelia, and for every soul lost to the cowardly violence of powerful men. We are not a mob. We are a surgical instrument of justice. Follow your road captains. Maintain discipline. Our mission is to save a life, not to start a riot. We will be the thunder that announces her salvation. Let's ride." A single, deafening roar answered him. 600 engines revved in unison, a sound so powerful it seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth. Then as one they moved. The procession was a sight to behold. A river of steel and leather flowing through the awakening city. Jax, Ricky, and the primary breach team were at the very front, a spear tip aimed at the heart of Dominic's fortress. They moved with the terrifying beauty of a force of nature, parting traffic like the Red Sea. People stopped on sidewalks, staring in awe and fear. They filmed on their phones, the thunderous noise of the bikes overwhelming their microphones. They were witnessing something epic, something primal. This wasn't a gang. This was a migration, a crusade on wheels. As they approached the manicured, tree-lined streets of the North Hills, the atmosphere changed. The roar of the engines echoed off the high walls of the mansions, a sound of raw, untamed power invading a world of sterile, protected wealth. Inside his mansion, Dominic Valerius was feeling pleased with himself. He had just finished a call with his lawyers, finalizing the last details of his plan. Today, he would sign the papers that would make him an even richer man. And today, the nuisance of his mother-in-law would be permanently dealt with. He'd arranged for her to trip near the top of the grand staircase. A tragique accident. People would whisper, but with his money and connections, it would all smooth over. He smiled as he sipped his expensive coffee. He felt a faint vibration. He frowned, placing his cup down. The vibration grew stronger, a low thrumming that rattled the windows in their frames. It sounded like an earthquake, but it was rhythmic, mechanical. He walked to the massive floor-to-ceiling window in his living room that overlooked the street. What he saw made his blood run cold. The entire street, as far as he could see in either direction, was filled with motorcycles. Hundreds of them. And at the front of the pack, a wall of grim-faced men in leather vests were dismounting, their eyes fixed on his house. His heart hammered against his ribs. This was impossible. This was a nightmare. His private security guards at the front gate were already surrounded, hands in the air, their faces pale with terror. He fumbled for his phone to call the police, his mind reeling. Who were they? Why were they here? Then he saw him. At the head of the group, a massive, bearded man with eyes that burned with a cold, personal hatred. And next to him, the young, defiant punk from the pharmacy. The kid who had given Serafina his jacket. The jacket. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The old woman had somehow called them. The stupid, worthless old woman had brought this army of freaks to his doorstep. Panic gave way to pure, unadulterated rage. If he was going down, she was coming with him. The silence that fell after 600 engines cut out was more menacing than the roar had been. The only sound was the collective, metallic thud of hundreds of kickstands hitting asphalt. Dominic Valerius watched in horror as his multi-million-dollar street transformed into an occupation zone. His two security guards at the front gate, highly paid and trained professionals, were completely outflanked. A dozen bikers, moving with practiced, silent efficiency, had simply surrounded them. No weapons were drawn, but the sheer intimidation factor was absolute. The guards wisely dropped their firearms and raised their hands, their faces ashen. Another team of bikers, led by the grizzled veteran bear, moved along the perimeter wall, disabling the security cameras one by one with swift, precise movements. They weren't smashing them. They were expertly cutting the wires, preserving the evidence they might contain. This wasn't a chaotic mob. It was a disciplined military operation. Jax, with Ricky and a hand-picked 10-man breach team at his back, walked calmly up the long, paved driveway. Their boots crunched on the expensive gravel, the sound echoing in the unnerving quiet. They stopped before the massive, ornate front door. Jax didn't bother knocking. He simply nodded to a hulking biker named Crusher, who was carrying a compact, steel-battering ram. Crusher swung the ram once, a powerful, explosive impact that sent cracks spiderwebbing through the custom-carved wood. The second swing shattered the lock and sent the heavy door flying inward, crashing against the marble floor of the foyer. The breach team swarmed in, fanning out with tactical precision. They were a whirlwind of black leather and grim determination, clearing the ground floor in seconds. "Clear," came the calls from the living room. "Kitchen clear. Office clear." Jax's eyes scanned the opulent, soulless space. It was a monument to wealth and ego, and it made his stomach turn. This was the cage Amelia's abuser had lived in. This was the cage Serafina had been trapped in. "He's upstairs," Jax growled. "With her. Let's move." Meanwhile, upstairs, Dominic's rage had consumed his panic. He stormed into Serafina's room, finding her standing by the window, her face illuminated by the flashing lights of the bikes outside. She wasn't cowering. For the first time in years, she stood tall, her back straight. On her face was not fear, but a look of calm, righteous fury. She was wearing the Hell's Angels Prospect vest. "You!" he shrieked, his voice cracking. "You did this. You worthless old hag. You brought the circus to my door." He lunged for her, but Serafina was ready. She had been waiting for this moment. As he reached for her, she sidestepped with surprising agility and swung a heavy, brass bedside lamp with all her might, catching him squarely on the side of the head. He staggered back, stunned, a trickle of blood running down his temple. The shock on his face was almost comical. He had never seen her fight back. He had never imagined she was capable of it. The blow bought her only a few seconds. He roared in pain and fury and grabbed her, his hands like vices on her frail arms. He dragged her out of the room and toward the master suite at the end of the hall, which contained a reinforced panic room. "You're not getting away," he snarled, shoving her into the suite. "We're going to wait for the real police, and I'm going to tell them you're a senile old woman who invited a biker gang to attack me. They'll lock you in a padded room for the rest of your miserable life." Just as he was about to slam the heavy bedroom door shut, Jax and the breach team stormed the top of the stairs. "Valerius!" Jax's voice was thunder. Dominic froze, his hand on the door. He was trapped. He yanked Seraphina in front of him, pressing the cold steel of a letter opener he'd grabbed from a desk against her throat. "Stay back!" he screamed, his eyes wild with desperation. "I swear to God, I'll kill her. Stay back, all of you." The bikers halted at the end of the hallway, forming a silent, menacing wall. Jax stepped forward, his expression unreadable, his eyes holding Dominic's gaze. "Let her go, Valerius," Jax said, his voice dangerously calm. "This ends now. There's nowhere for you to run. You have no idea who you're messing with." Dominic sneered, trying to regain some semblance of control. "My lawyers will have you and your tattooed freaks rotting in prison for the rest of your lives for this. And you," Jax replied, taking another slow step forward, "have no idea what happens when you hurt one of our own. You see, you made this personal a long time ago. You made this personal when you learned how to get away with murder from the man who killed my sister." Amelia, Dominic's face went white. The name, spoken with such cold certainty, shattered his last shred of composure. In that moment of shocked hesitation, Seraphina acted. With a surge of adrenaline, she stomped down hard on Dominic's instep with her heel and drove her elbow backward into his ribs. He grunted in pain, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. It was all the opening they needed. In the split second that Dominic's grip faltered, Ricky and Crusher moved. They were a blur of motion, covering the 10 feet of hallway in an instant. Crusher, the massive biker who had breached the front door, slammed into Dominic like a freight train, his shoulder hitting the man squarely in the chest. The impact threw Dominic backward, away from Seraphina, and he crashed into the wall with a sickening thud, the letter opener clattering to the floor. Ricky was right behind him, moving not toward Dominic, but toward Seraphina. He gently but firmly guided her away from the chaos, shielding her with his own body and pulling her back toward the safety of the main group of bikers. "It's okay, ma'am," he said softly, his voice a stark contrast to the violence unfolding behind them. "We've got you. You're safe now." Dominic, dazed but still full of fight, scrambled to his feet, his face contorted in a mask of pure hate. He lunged at Jax, his hands outstretched like claws. It was a fatal mistake. Jax didn't even flinch. He met the charge with a single, perfectly executed move. He sidestepped, grabbed Dominic's outstretched arm, and used the man's own momentum to twist him around, slamming him face first onto the polished hardwood floor. Jax's knee landed squarely in the center of Dominic's back, pinning him. The fight was over. It had been swift, brutal, and decisive. "This is for Amelia," Jax whispered, his voice for Dominic's ears only, a cold, final judgment. He pulled Dominic's arms behind his back, the snapping sound of zip ties cinching tight, echoing in the hallway. The other bikers secured Dominic's legs. He was neutralized, trussed up like an animal, his arrogant sneers replaced by pathetic, sputtering curses. The tension in the hallway broke. The immediate threat was gone. Jax stood up, breathing heavily, not from exertion, but from the sheer emotional weight of the moment. He looked at Seraphina, who was standing with Ricky, her eyes wide. She was trembling again, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was the aftershock of a battle won. He walked over to her, his expression softening. He reached out and gently took the prospect vest from her shoulders. Then he unzipped his own cut, the revered leather vest of a Hell's Angels president, worn and faded, covered in the patches and pins of a lifetime of loyalty and war. He draped it over her shoulders. It was far too big for her, swallowing her small frame, but it was the highest honor he could bestow. "You're one of us now, Seraphina," he said, his gravelly voice thick with emotion. "Your family." Tears streamed down Seraphina's face, washing away years of pain and fear. She looked from Jax's kind, weary eyes to Ricky's proud smile, and then past them to the hallway filled with grim-faced guardians. She saw the sea of bikers waiting outside. She wasn't a victim anymore. She was a survivor, and she was home. They led her slowly down the grand staircase, a queen escorted by her honor guard. As she stepped out the front door into the morning sun, a low, respectful rumble started. One by one, the engines of over 600 motorcycles sparked to life, not the aggressive roar of a charge, but a deep, resonant hum, a salute. Serafina looked out at the endless river of chrome and leather, at the hundreds of men who had come to save one old woman they had never met. And for the first time in a decade, she smiled. A real, genuine smile that reached her eyes and lit up her entire face. Sirens wailed in the distance. The police were finally arriving, called by panicked neighbors. When they got there, they found a bizarre scene. A multi-million-dollar mansion surrounded by the most notorious motorcycle club in the world, whose members were calm, orderly, and directing traffic. On the front lawn, a wealthy CEO was gift-wrapped for them in zip ties. Jax met the bewildered police sergeant at the end of the driveway. He handed him a flash drive. "On here," Jax said calmly, "you'll find evidence from his own security cameras of assault and unlawful imprisonment. You'll also find a detailed dossier our associates put together on Mr. Valerius's financial crimes. Embezzlement, fraud, the works. Enough to put him away for a very long time. We also have a witness who will testify that he confessed his intent to commit murder. Oh, and you might want to reopen the cold case on Amelia Collins." Mr. Valerius was very forthcoming about his connection to it. The sergeant stared, dumbfounded, at the flash drive, then at the legion of bikers, and finally at the bound man on the lawn. He knew he was looking at a situation far above his pay grade. He simply nodded and took the drive. We'll take it from here," Jax nodded back. "We know you will. Justice, in its own way, was being served." The weeks that followed the raid were a period of profound transformation for Serafina. The Hells Angels didn't just rescue her and ride off into the sunset. They adopted her. They understood that Dominic had not only caged her body, but had also systematically dismantled her life. With Jax's guidance, the club's network sprang into action. They connected her with a bulldog of a lawyer, a woman who owed the club a favor and who despised men like Dominic Valerius. She worked pro bono, meticulously untangling the web of fraudulent documents Dominic had used to seize Serafina's assets. The legal battle was fierce, but with the evidence the bikers had collected and Dominic's credibility shattered by a mountain of criminal charges, the outcome was inevitable. Serafina won back her home, her fortune, and her name. But she chose not to return to the cold, glass mansion. The memories there were too toxic. Instead, she sold it, donating a significant portion of the proceeds to a battered women's shelter that Amelia's family had set up in her name. The club found her a small, charming house in a quiet, friendly neighborhood, far from the isolation of the hills. Several of the members, who worked in construction, spent a week renovating it for her, painting the walls warm colors, building a custom ramp for the front porch, and planting a new garden of rose bushes in the backyard. It became her sanctuary, but she was never alone. There was always a bike parked out front, a silent guardian angel watching over her. Her true healing, however, happened at the clubhouse. She started visiting, tentatively at first, bringing homemade cookies and cakes as a thank you. The gruff, intimidating bikers, men known as Bear, Crusher, and Scab, melted in her presence. They treated her with a mixture of reverence and familial affection. She became their matriarch, the den mother they never knew they needed. She'd sit at the big oak table, sipping tea while they cleaned their weapons and planned their runs, her calm presence a soothing balm on their rough-edged world. She'd listen to their stories, their problems with women, their financial woes, and offer quiet, sage advice. In turn, they gave her back the family she had lost. They taught her to play pool, though she was terrible at it. They explained the intricate politics of the different charters. Ricky, her first angel, as she called him, would visit her at home almost every day, helping with groceries, fixing leaky faucets, or just sitting with her in the garden, listening to her talk about her late husband, Robert. She was giving them a piece of the normal, stable life many of them had never known. and they were giving her an unwavering shield of protection and love. She saw the men behind the fearsome reputation. She saw their loyalty, their fierce code of honor, their hidden vulnerabilities. They weren't just outlaws. They were a tribe of wounded warriors who had found strength in each other, and now they had opened their circle to include her. For Jax, Seraphina's presence was a form of redemption. Every time he saw her laughing in the clubhouse, her eyes bright and full of life, he felt a small piece of the guilt he carried for Amelia chip away. He hadn't been able to save his sister, but the brotherhood he had built had saved Seraphina. He saw that the lessons learned from his greatest failure had forged the club into a more purposeful, more righteous entity. They were still dangerous men, and the world still saw them as villains, but they knew the truth. They were a line in the sand. They were the last resort for people the system had failed. One crisp evening, months after the rescue, Jax found Seraphina sitting on the clubhouse porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the sunset. He sat down next to her, the silence comfortable between them. "I never properly thank you, Jackson," she said softly, not looking at him. "Not just for saving my life, but for giving me one back. You don't have to thank us, Seraphina," he replied, his voice a low rumble. "You reminded us who we're supposed to be. He's going to be in prison for the rest of his life," she said, a statement of fact. Dominic Valerius, facing an avalanche of charges and with all his assets frozen, had taken a plea deal. His connection to Amelia's case had also led to the original investigation being reopened, and her abuser, the man Dominic had learned from, was finally facing a federal indictment. The ripples of their actions had brought justice for more than just one person. Jax confirmed. "Some monsters get put in cages." Seraphina finally turned to look at him, her gaze clear and strong. "And some monsters," she said, placing her small, wrinkled hand on his leather-clad arm, "are angels in disguise." Jax looked at her hand on his arm, then at her face, and for the first time in a very long time, he felt a sense of peace settle over his soul. The ghosts of the past were still there, but they were no longer screaming. They were whispering their thanks. The culmination of Seraphina's journey and the club's reaffirmed purpose came on a bright Saturday in the spring. The chapter was hosting its annual charity ride, a massive event to raise money for the shelter named after Amelia. Hundreds of bikers from all over the state had gathered, their bikes forming a dazzling spectacle of polished chrome and custom paint. This year, however, was different. The guest of honor was Seraphina. She wasn't riding on the back of a bike. Instead, she was the official starter of the event, standing on a small stage at the front of the procession. She wore a custom-made leather vest, smaller than the one Jax had given her, which fit her perfectly. On the back, it didn't say Hell's Angels. It simply had a beautiful, hand-tooled patch of a single guardian angel wing, intertwined with a rose. Below it were two words, "Our matriarch," as she stood at the podium, looking out over the sea of faces, the bikers, the families, the supporters. A profound sense of belonging washed over her. She was no longer the shivering, terrified woman on a park bench. She was a pillar of this community, a symbol of resilience and hope. Her voice, once thin and trembling, was clear and strong as she spoke into the microphone. "They say heroes wear capes," she began, her eyes finding Jax in the crowd. "But I'm here to tell you that sometimes they wear leather. They have loud engines and rough hands, but they also have the biggest hearts you will ever find. They are the guardians you never expect, the thunder on the horizon that signals hope for the hopeless." She raised a checkered flag. "Ride safe, my boys," she said, her voice full of love. "And thank you for bringing me home." A deafening roar of engines answered her. Jax, at the front of the pack with Ricky by his side, gave her a solemn nod. He looked at the endless line of his brothers, at the families cheering on the sidelines, at the woman they had all rallied to save, and felt a deep, abiding sense of rightness. This was his legacy, not the fear their name inspired in some, but the hope it represented to others. They were outlaws, yes. They lived by their own rules. But their first and most sacred rule was to protect their own, and their definition of their own had grown to include the lost, the broken, and the forgotten. As the last bike roared past and the procession began its journey, Jax's thoughts drifted. He thought of the darkness that men like Dominic Valerius brought into the world, a quiet, insidious evil that festered behind closed doors and walls of money. And he thought of the force required to combat it, not the polite, restrained force of a society that too often looked away, but a force that was loud, unapologetic, and overwhelming. A force that announced its presence with the thunder of 100 V-twin engines. They were the necessary antibody to a sickness, the savage justice for a civilized world's failures. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows and painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, the charity ride concluded at a large park. The day had been a massive success, raising a record amount for the shelter. But more than that, it had been a celebration of life, of brotherhood, and of redemption. Jax stood apart from the crowd, watching Seraphina as she was surrounded by well-wishers, laughing and telling stories. He saw Ricky standing nearby, watching her with the protective gaze of a loyal grandson. He saw his brothers, his family, united and strong. His personal demons had not been vanquished, but they had been met and answered. He had honored Amelia's memory not with vengeance, but with salvation. He had turned his deepest pain into his greatest purpose. They're the guardians you never expect, the thunder on the horizon that signals hope for the hopeless. If you believe in the power of a brotherhood that stands for something more, share this story. Let the world know that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear leather. And if you or someone you know is facing the darkness, never, ever give up hope. Because you never know when the roar of an engine might be the sound of your own angels coming to carry you home.